Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 26th Annual Dick, Ruth, and Judy Bell Lecture. I'm André Plourde, Dean of the Faculty of Public Affairs here at Carleton. As we begin, allow me to take a moment to acknowledge that the Carleton campus sits on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Dick, Ruth, and Judy Bell Lecture is one of our flagship events in the Faculty of Public Affairs. It was established in 1992 by Ruth Bell in honor of her husband, Dick, and her stepdaughter, Judy. And it honors the contributions of individuals to the political and public life of Canada. The list of past presenters reads like a who's who of Canadian public life. Former premiers and prime ministers, Roy Romano, Joe Giz, Robert Stanfield, Joe Clark, and Kim Campbell. Journalists and authors, Rosemary Barton, Roy McGregor, Chantal Hébert, Richard Gwynne, and Margaret Macmillan, and many, many more. Any one of them would be as interesting to hear from today as they were in their own time. They are history makers. And it's been an honor for us in the Faculty of Public Affairs to provide them with a podium from which they can share their experiences. This is an important part of our mission to foster informed citizenship, better democracy, and better societies, and to help prepare the leaders of tomorrow. I would like to thank the Office of the Vice President, Research and International, and the Office of the Provost and Vice President Academic for their support of this event and for their support of FPA Research Month as a whole. Just a quick mention, we have many more events coming up as part of FPA Research Month. You can find the full list on our website, carleton.fpa/FPA. Please join us for all of them. I also invite you to take home a copy of Ruth Bell's autobiography. You'll be able to find copies of the book near the registration desk in the auditorium as you leave for the reception. Many thanks to Dorothy Phillips and the Canadian Federation of University Women of Ottawa for providing them this evening. And now I will invite Barry Wright, Associate Dean and Director of Arthur Kroeger College, to come forward to introduce tonight's speaker. Barry?
Thank you, Dean Plourde. It is my great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Jean Charest, our guest speaker for the 2018 Bell Lecture. As Dean Plourde noted, the Bell Lecture series provides the opportunity for distinguished Canadians to share their insights about public affairs with the Carleton communities. When I first spoke to Jean Charest last week, he suggested I keep my introductory remarks brief, which I intend to do, but it is difficult to sound modest about his achievements. I can safely assume many of you know his political and policy accomplishments, so that helps with brevity, certainly, but I also hope to do justice to them. Jean Charest has had a career in public service spanning 3 decades, entering federal politics in 1984 when he was elected to the House of Commons and became Canada's youngest cabinet minister. In 1991, he became Minister of the Environment, helping Canada emerge to play a leading role amongst the G7 countries on issues of climate change and biodiversity. In 1993, he became Minister of Industry and Deputy Prime Minister. Following the election that year, he became leader of the Federal Progressive Conservative Party, remaining so until 1998, when he left federal politics to lead the Quebec Liberal Party. Quebec Liberals received more votes than the governing party in the provincial election that followed, but did not form government until 2003, when Jean Charest led his party to a majority, winning elections again in 2007 and 2008. Under Premier Charest, Quebec experienced sustained economic growth, saw major infrastructure investment, and became a world-leading jurisdiction in addressing environmental issues. His government introduced North America's first carbon levy and initiated Plan Nord, a major sustainable development initiative. He also promoted new Canada-European Union trade agreement negotiations, a process that has recently culminated in the comprehensive CETA agreement. Jean Charest continues to be active in such areas as a partner at McCarthy Tétrault, sharing his public policy and international affairs expertise. This evening, Monsieur Charest will address international trends, including international trade, the challenges they present, and their impact on Canada and its relations with other countries. All matters of vital interest to the constituent departments and schools, our faculty and students in the Faculty of Public Affairs. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Jean Charest to the stage for his lecture, Change Trends in Canada.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I have, here, let me try to give you a little more visibility. Actually, I'm going to be able to walk around a bit because I have a mic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Alistair, thank you for attending. And Monsieur Plourde, ça me fait beaucoup plaisir vous revoir. And I want to tell you how delighted I am to be invited to deliver this lecture this year. And I was, when I accepted the invitation, I asked a very dear friend of mine, Jody White, who's with us tonight, who worked on my campaigns, a little bit about the Bell family. And you alluded to that a few minutes ago. And I was very fascinated to learn that Ruth Bell also put together the archives of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. So I'm delighted. I hope I'm part of the archives and play a small role in the... And Mr. Bell had been a minister in the government of John Diefenbaker. So it was very interesting to see. And so they obviously believed a lot in public policy and the importance of public policy, as I do. And I'm in front of you now. It's been 5 years since I've left political life. I had a run of 28 years. And it wasn't planned that way, believe me. When I was elected for the first time in 1984, I was 26 years old. And I hadn't planned on running at a young age either. But things just unfolded. And when it was all over, I was invited to do a presentation somewhere, and someone asked me whether I had regretted having been in politics for 28 years. And I sort of thought, you know, if I had been presented with a choice at 26 years old to be a billionaire, so you can be a billionaire, or to actually experience what I experienced in 28 years, would my life have been more exciting or more fulfilling? I doubt it. And in fact, I know what the answer is. I had a very, very exciting life. And a lot of it was made of very special moments of great elation and great disappointment, of success and a lot of failures, and probably a lot more failures than success. But when I left public office in 2012, I left with no regrets. And I met a lot of people after politics who had this sense of unfinished business, and that's not my case. And I look back on those years with a great deal of fondness. Now, as was mentioned, I'm with a law firm, and I work, and I do a number of things, but I do a number of presentations, and a lot of it is to do with trends and public policy, but not partisan politics, which I stay away from as much as I can, and avoid as much as I can. So tonight what I want to do with you is share some thoughts on some of the trends that we see out there. And I've always been very interested in this because if you're in public office and you have the responsibility of governing, your job is to try to understand what's happening and to make a very real effort, more than just an effort, to go way beyond the headlines and try to figure out where things are going. Why are things happening the way they are happening? And what does it mean for the people you represent here in Canada? And where do we fit in all of this? And what is it that we need to do so that we can accomplish our goals, that we can fulfill our destiny, that we can be happy and play a role? And so that's the way I saw things. And so I was always very interested in this. And I'd read a lot, and I'd share clippings with the people in my government. I'd send them notes. It would drive them crazy. And so tonight what I want to do with you is run through, and I have this presentation. I'm sorry I have a presentation, and it always reminds me there was a political party in Norway that ran on no more PowerPoints. It did very well in the election campaign. But it actually will help me as I run through it. And I'll go through it fairly rapidly because there's always too many of them. And please don't pay attention to all the numbers. It's just going to help me give you a sense of where my thoughts are. And actually, I'm going to tell you about a lot of things you already know, but we'll try to tie them together. And at the end, what I want to do is share some thoughts on some of the things I think Canada should focus on, the things we should pay attention to. And there could always be a very, very long list. It's not going to be. I'll try to shorten it up. I do want to acknowledge the work of someone who helped put this together. I am very lucky to have interns from Sherbrooke University that I graduated from. There isn't always only Carleton, you know. I graduated from Sherbrooke University, where I'm from, and they have a master's program in international law and politics. And I get the best of the interns of the group on a 6-month rotating basis. Sibina Yankovic, who's right here, she did all the work for this presentation. So if you like it, thank her. So here are some of the issues I'm going to touch upon about trends and the global economy and a few things. But please read this quote. I think it really encapsulates this. I mean, when I saw that quote, I said, this is the time we live in, right? I love Abraham Lincoln. I listen to him on CNN all the time. But when I saw that, I thought, geez, doesn't that really represent? So trends, the first thing I wanted to talk about is on trade and the general economy as such. Since we've come out of the financial and economic crisis, where for the first time, the world's economy is what they call synchronized. The word, what it represents is that in all parts of the world, for the first time since 2008, all parts, whether it's Japan, Africa, Asia, or North America, are progressing. We have growth, and that's good news. But part of the characteristics of this growth, as we'll see later on in this day and age, is the fact that this growth is rather anemic relative to what we experienced in the past, and there's reasons for that. On the right, I want you to pay attention to what that graph is, and there's a reason for that. This is growth from about 1987. It starts in 85. This is the growth in trade, and this is the growth of the world's GDP. What you have in the middle here is the locomotive of growth that we've had in the world from 1987 until 2007, where annual growth was on average 7.1% a year, and the world's GDP would vary from 3.5 to 3.4. And that has been an extraordinary, unique moment in the history of mankind where trade growth has been a locomotive of prosperity for the world with very important benefits for the world. I will talk about that a little later, but this is direct. This explains the emergence of a new middle class in the world. And it has helped reduce poverty and extreme poverty in a lot of parts of the globe also. So it's a very significant change. In 2007, 2008, that line broke and trade growth was below GDP world growth. And now we're coming out of that, and trade growth is starting to be bigger, more important than GDP growth. By the way, if you have GDP growth in the world at about 3%, that is in good part just demographic growth. Chances are at 3%, a big chunk of that growth would be in China. There are chances that the world is probably in a recession. So if you're in the range of 3.4 to 4, it means the world is actually growing and probably has synchronized growth. Again, here on this graph on the left is the prices and wages, and the story has been there's been economic growth in the last few years. We are in the longest period in the United States of economic growth in this cycle that we've seen in a long time. And part of the story that you hear about all the time is that we have growth, lower unemployment, but wages are not following. And why? Why is it that wages are not increasing? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but on the right side you have the productivity numbers, and productivity, which no one really understands. And I remember when I was in government, Jody, we'd have talks about productivity. We have to increase productivity. And I used to remind my colleagues, if you go out there and say to the folks in your ridings, we want more productivity, what do you think they hear? They hear, you want me to work more for less. That's what you want. And it's not quite that. And I learned more about it at the time. For example, what is productivity in a country that makes 2x4s? If you make 2x4s, There's a finite amount of profit you can make on a 2x4. If you make perfume, if you make planes, if you make foie gras, chances are you have higher productivity because there's more added value. But the point here is we have an issue, and that's an awkward issue of growth, but slower productivity and slower wage growth. And that's been a big part of the story in the world. And by the way, it's part of the reason of why Trump, which we'll talk about at one point. Why Trump? Well, this is part of it. The world debt, and the only point I want to make here is this. We have never been more indebted. Sovereign debt of countries, corporate debt, personal debt. And low interest rates are the story behind that. Actually, in Canada, ironically, some of you are old enough to remember the day after the referendum, the Wall Street Journal writes this extraordinary story. They say Canada is bankrupt because we were so much in debt and had such a high deficit. Actually, today we have the same level of debt in Canada that we did in 1996, only it is shared differently. Government has less debt. Individuals have more of that debt. Again, be careful. Beyond the headline of debt in Canada is equity. There's a reason why we have higher debt. People are buying houses, and the story of houses in Canada is Toronto and Vancouver. It is not Ottawa, less. It's not Montreal, and it's not the Atlantic. And there's equity against that debt. So it's not all bad. It's not a bad story. But the debt, I just find the debt story intriguing, and I'll tell you why for this reason. Human beings are very, very predictable. We all know interest rates are going to go up, right? But you know what? We are not ready for when that will happen. Businesses are not ready for when that will happen. I guarantee you they're not ready. And the day interest rates start to go up, and there are real chances that's going to happen this year because there's more growth in the economy and there's less unemployment, well then, a lot of people are going to be affected by that. This is Canadian household debt, and the blue, dark blue line at the end tells the story of where we are. We've never had higher personal debt in the country than we've had. But this line is more encouraging. This blue line tells you how much of it is equity in houses. So it's against equity. So it's not a bad story, actually. It's not a surprising story. And it's not dramatic. What it does mean, though, as I mentioned, when interest rates will go up in this country, watch for a lot of people to be in trouble very fast. This story, this graph on both sides is interesting. This one is the increase of GDP in Great Britain and the United States. And the red line that's broken is the earning of individuals. And the red line that's full is the increase in GDP. And this is 2000 to 2015. This red line of increase in GDP goes up. Everyone must be doing great. But the broken line is going down. And that's the earnings per individual. Why? Because the labor market is changing. And that is directly related, by the way, to the two countries in the world that have the biggest issue of disparity in income, the United States and Great Britain. Same story in the United States. This graph is very interesting. It speaks to the widening gap of annualized lifetime income. I'm going to read you what it says because it's a little complicated, but the line here in the middle tells the story. The median income a man would earn over his career peaked with those who entered the workforce in 1967. This is 1957. This is the peak in 1967. And has declined 19% since then. And those with lower incomes in this bracket have fared even worse, while those at the very top have increased. And this is in the United States. Isn't it an interesting story? Actually, what we've seen over time, and this is the United States, but it's also other parts of the world, is that the real median income of people has gradually diminished. You wonder why there's that angst in the population that a lot of us did not detect, but Donald Trump understood instinctively, and populists understand instinctively. That's a big part of the story. And a lot of us did not see that or appreciate what it meant. This is a quote from an academic whose name is Gordon, who wrote a book in 2016, a very popular book. Essentially, his theory goes like this. From 1870 to 1970, we had an extraordinary, out of the ordinary period of growth in the world because of the creation, the invention of certain basic technologies that changed our lives. Running water and sanitary services and telephones and electricity. And this is the heart of the Industrial Revolution. But in 1970, that ceased and gradually diminished. In other words, the technologies that have been created since then have not had that big bang effect of what happened between 1870 and 1970. And so the theory goes this way. What we experienced in the past is the exception. It's not the rule. It's the exception. What we are actually returned to is what is more normal. And more normal growth is slower, 1%, 2% in mature economies. And that's his theory. Now, not everyone agrees with him, by the way. Like on a lot of these things, a lot of other economists say, no, you're wrong, Gordon. You and we are not measuring correctly the impact of technologies on productivity and on health, on our wealth. And it's just that we are not capturing in the numbers the actual wealth that we're capturing. So there's a disagreement on that. But I actually think Gordon is on to something. On trends, growth in trade, world trade starting to recover. As I mentioned, I've covered that already, and this is a line that starts in 1980, and the line on the top is trade and the bottom. This is, by the way, you don't have to see the numbers. This is about the middle class. McKinsey, the consulting firm, who I have a lot of respect for, they produce a lot of very interesting material. They produced one report where they said something that really stood out. They said, you know, the creation of this new middle class in the world is the biggest thing that has ever happened since the creation of capitalism. I mean, that's not, you know, it's pretty broad. Now, the bubbles, what do they say? It's a very interesting projection. And this is from 2009 in dark to 2030, and the growth of the middle class. This is Asia. Look at the bubble. So the story there is very clear. There's going to be a very rapid increase in the middle class in Asia. It's happening now, by the way. And then Middle East, North Africa, an increase. Sub-Saharan Africa, very small, of course, but an increase. Europe, modest increase. Central South America, an increase. North America is the only place on that chart where there's a projection of a decrease in the middle class from 2009 to 2030. Why Trump? Why Trump? Now, the other colors are interesting also because it speaks to demographics and increases in the size of the economy. This is middle class consumption in the squares. And essentially the story is two countries. China with 10 trillion increase, and then you have India. The others are in single digits. And then you have, in these colors here, in the dark blue, shrinking populations, in red, increasing populations. China, Russia, Japan, they all have interesting stories. In China, the story is, the old adage goes, they're going to get old before they get rich. Japan has a very serious problem. Maureen just came back from Japan. It is a fascinating story, and they're in total denial. Their population is going to go down very rapidly, and yet they cannot seem to come to grips with the fact that they have to increase their population, accept more foreigners. And Russia is decreasing. By the way, just as an aside, the other country that's joined that club is the United States, who have seen a decrease in the life expectancy of men over the last few years. Very interesting story about, and it, in good part about opioids, which I find to be very sad, but a very real story. Immigration and the movement of people is an issue I think, and I'm going to get to that in my conclusions, I care a lot about. I think that's a big part of our world. And that's a big part of what has changed. Think of your own families, of how mobile we have become. I have my oldest daughter, Amélie, lives in Hong Kong. She married a Frenchman. He's from Aix-en-Provence. They moved to New York. They had their first child. She's an American. 2 years ago, they had a boy in Hong Kong. We do not know what he is. She's Canadian. He's French. The granddaughter's American, and he's He's going to probably, I think he took the French citizenship. My daughter won't tell me because she knows that I'm not going to be happy with that. But I know because my wife told me. And I mean, that's the world. By the way, this French son-in-law I have is a fantastic young man, Julien. I went fishing with him when I was Premier. One of my security guys, to tell you how nice he is, one of my security guys said, Monsieur Charest, Julien, même s'il est français, il est gentil, hein? I thought, I did not pass on the compliment, and this cannot leave the room. So, but what we are, and one of the aspects of this that's very interesting for Canada is a new category of immigration that's called aspirational immigration. And it's tied to this new middle class. And what is aspirational immigration? It's people in China, India, it can be Korea, who have children that they want to send abroad. Or they want to secure a place abroad as an insurance policy and buying real estate. Or aspirational immigration by people who have the financial means to move. And that's a relatively new phenomenon, and one that impacts Canada probably more than, well, a lot more than the average country, but probably among all the countries in the world. This is a chart on demographics, and in green they're young and yellow, and in dark red or whatever the darkest, they're older. You can see where Africa carries this extraordinary potential. It's a very young population, which is going to increase at a very rapid clip in the next few years. And so they have a story. India has this great demographic benefit, dividend you could call. And you can see where both Canada, the United States is in a relatively better shape, but other countries are much less well positioned. Technology, I am not technical at all. I mean, it's taking all my concentration to deal with this thing here, you know. I'm not techno at all, but if there's one thing I think we can all understand is that we are, in 5 years from now, I'm convinced we're all going to be surprised by whatever they will be bold. And I was elected, I shouldn't tell, in 1984 I got elected. There were no cell phones. There's no ATM machine. My neighbor in the Confederation building was Bob Layton, the dad of Jack Layton. He was the Minister of Mines. I remember Bob coming into my office saying, Jean, come over here, I have to show you something. I said, what is it? He said, it's a fax machine. No, he was excited. You can't find a fax machine. The point on technology, and here's two very fascinating quotes by Larry Page. The first one I pulled out when I saw him say this, the bottom one. He was asked, how much have we discovered? Which I thought was a pretty stupid question. You know, how much, as though there's a finite amount of things we discovered, then we all go home, right? But he gave a very astute answer. He said, I think we are only at 1% of what is possible. To make the point of how fast things have gone, but what the potential is. And then he was asked, this other statement, everything you can imagine is achievable. You have to imagine it and work for it. Whoever thought we'd look into our phones, and as we do, when Michelle, we talk to our grandchildren in Hong Kong. And so on technology, we are going to be surprised. This graph is difficult for you to see, but what essentially it is these are the 10 biggest companies in market value in the world. And this is in 2007, this is in 2017. So who do you have in the list? Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon are among the 4. And you know where they were back then? And so this is how the economy is changing. The other part that's interesting is Alibaba and Tencent on that list, who were not even on that chart in 2007. So not only is it about technology companies occupying and having a bigger place, it's about also Chinese companies and Asian companies moving in. Technology, about artificial intelligence. These are jobs. This is a chart Great Britain did about jobs that could be replaced by robots or by automation, and who's threatened and who is not threatened. By the way, if you're a CEO, you're in good shape, or an airline pilot, you're in good, or if you're a priest or a nun, you're safe. But journalists are threatened, lawyers even are threatened. I'd feel bad about that. And we have a philosophy back home, no lawyer left behind. And so this represents one of the biggest. There are the pessimists on this believe that all the jobs, and in Silicon Valley, the issue of guaranteed annual income has reappeared on the radar screen based on the assumption that a whole group of people are going to lose their jobs and we have to do something to. I don't believe that. I think new jobs are going to be created. I'm not a pessimist about that, but it is part of the political debate in the last few years. And the world is getting better. This is something I want to share with you. You may have seen the interviews of Steve Pinker, who's a Canadian, born in Montreal at Harvard, and he's written 2 books about the state of the world. It's a bit surprising because it runs counter to the broad perception that the world is in bad shape. And he makes the point, based on his research, which is very compelling, that no, we're not in bad shape. Actually, we're doing a lot better than we did. And he's supported in that by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And Bill Gates and Melinda Gates put out a newsletter every year that I invite you to read. It's very compelling also, for one reason. The argument Bill and Melinda Gates make is this: foreign aid works. We have to continue, we have to persist, and we have to avoid the perception that it's being wasted or there's corruption, because there is corruption and waste. They don't deny that. But don't be mistaken by some of those sad stories when in fact a lot is being done to fight disease and to fight poverty. And we are making headway. And the point they're making is this: we shouldn't stop. Don't stop. We need to continue, whether it's governments or foundations. And so there are fewer than 10% of people that now live in extreme poverty. 325,000 more people get access to electricity every day. 300,000 more people get access to water every day. Fewer than 15% of people are illiterate. More than 100 million children were saved since 1990. And again, it's a tricky argument because when you make it, sometimes people think, well, you're content, we'll stop. When that's not at all the argument. It's exactly the contrary. Let's do more of what we're doing and more rapidly so that we can help more people. Canada and trade, I want to talk about. You know, if you wanted to look at the world on the trade side, you could cut it up into 4 parts. Europe is a quarter, or 25% of the world's GDP. North America is another 25%. Asia, large, including India, another 25%, and then the rest of the world, 25%. And why would you look at it that way? It's because since the WTO went off the rails in 2007, the regional trade groups have been constituting themselves. And now they're starting to talk to each other. And world trade at the WTO has slowed down, except for some marginal progress on some issues like border administration. But if you chose, you could look at the world as being those 4 big blocks. What's out there right now? Well, TPP. TPP, as you remember, was the great initiative of the Obama administration, who at the outset, by the way, didn't say it was about containing China. I remember that well. No, it's not about containing. By the time he got at the end of the process, it was all about containing China. And very political. But it was 40% of the world's GDP with the United States. Since they have withdrawn, it represents close to 14% of the world's GDP. But it is very significant for Canada because it allows us to enter into a trade agreement with Japan, which is a relatively closed economy and the 3rd biggest economy in the world. The European Union, I just want to give you an example, has probably been the region that has been the most aggressive in pursuing trade agreements. They've done one with us, but they're now signed a deal with Japan. They are revising and upgrading the deal they did in '97 with Mexico. They're negotiating now with Mercosur, which is 4 of the southern Latin American countries. The Eurasian Economic Union I just threw in there because that's out there. There was CETA that Canada and Europe did. TTIP was the United States negotiating with Europe. And then on the Asian side, there's the One Belt, One Road initiative of the Chinese government. And there's RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is 16 countries, the 10 ASEAN countries, plus Australia, New Zealand, China, India, as part of that group. So there's a lot happening, but most of it on a regional side. One Belt, One Road is the great project of Xi Jinping, $1 trillion of construction of infrastructure that will connect Asia to Europe, both by road and by shipping lanes and infrastructure. But it is most of all very much a political initiative so that they can be part of the building and influencing a number of very important neighbors, including in Eurasia. And then there's the RCEP initiative that we talked about just a moment ago. Canada is a country that is very involved in multilateralism. We have a number of trade deals and a network of free trade agreements that cover right now about 52 countries. On CETA, which I was very involved in, it's the Canada-Europe Trade Agreement. It is the most comprehensive trade agreement in the world right now, for a reason. It digs down deeper than ever before in trade agreements in dealing with issues like norms and regulations, because tariffs are all good. I mean, that's good to get rid of tariffs, but that's the easy part. And in the case of CETA, all the tariffs, 98% of all the tariffs between Europe and the United States, Europe and Canada, disappeared on the 21st of September, on the very first day. I was very proud to read in the New York Times how disappointed Maine lobster fishermen were disappointed because Canada had a marked advantage in the European market, the Nova Scotia lobster industry, because the tariff had disappeared. And so this trade agreement for Canada is very significant, if only because it gives us access to the biggest consumer market in the world, which, if you include the UK, is 500 million people. And the timing could not have been better. Who would have thought? This started in 2007. By the way, when we announced the start of the negotiations in 2009, we publicly said this will take 2 years. We said it'll probably be 4. It took 10. Now let me share a rule with you about trade negotiations. It's like house renovations. Good luck if you think you're going to be on schedule and on budget. And even more luck to you if you're still with your partner when it's finished. And this, by the way, because I want to draw your attention to NAFTA, this takes 10 years when you agree on the objective. You're aligned. We agreed. We start the negotiation saying we want the same thing. We just have to figure out how we get there. Imagine if you sit around the table with one of the partners, you're 3, and one of them doesn't agree. You're not aligned. So this trade agreement for Canada is going to be very significant. CPTPP was also signed, is a very important block for us. It allows us to enter into Asia. We have one trade agreement with Asia. It's South Korea, a very significant one. And this one will allow us to make an entry into a marketplace where we need to diversify. Who's our largest trading partner? Here's a few of the things. Trade with the United States is 40% of Canada's GDP. But if you put it in context, we are 2% of their GDP. It's 40% for us. Now, I'm not saying those numbers are misleading, because even if it's only 2% of the Americans' GDP, it's their automotive industry. It's farming. It's energy. Believe me, those constituents care. And they have reason to care. So the 2% really doesn't represent what the real interest of our American neighbors are. Our share of the U.S. market has gone down. This chart is interesting too. It tells a story of what's happened to Canada. This line here is where we were in 1987 in the American market. Our share in 94 was 20%. Now we're down to about 13%. This is Mexico. And this line here, the yellow line is China. Look at how China has been able to capture a bigger and bigger part of the American export market. That's where the world is going, and that's the challenge. That chart tells you the challenge that we face as a country. NAFTA, there's 3 numbers that really tell the story of how important NAFTA is and how lucky we are. We are 7% of the world's population, 474 million people. And it's a quarter of the world's GDP. 7% of the world's population captures a quarter of the world's GDP. If citizenship were a lottery, we won. And for all the faults and weaknesses of our neighbors, forget the political side, whatever it is, we are born in a very, very good neighborhood. I only wish that our American neighbors saw it that way and would say, well, why don't we make it better than it already is and reinforce it and protect it? as opposed to taking an opposite view. So on NAFTA, the numbers are good. I mean, look, this is the trade deficit. This is what's driving Mr. Trump's view of the world. So this starts in 1978, and it's the trade deficit that they've had among the three countries, and the American numbers obviously have gone down. The Americans, as a consequence of this ideological push that they've put in revising NAFTA, have asked for 5 things that for Canada are really objectionable. One is to change the rules of origin in the automotive sector. And by the way, NAFTA is about cars. 80% of what the NAFTA discussion will be about in the end is the automotive industry, and a lot of that is centered here in Ontario. Second, dispute resolution mechanism. They want to get rid of that. Their view, though, is very interesting. You have to understand why they want to get rid of it. Mr. Lighthizer, in particular, has this deep embedded belief that the United States of America should not cede any sovereignty to any other court outside of the United States to decide their laws. It's a very clear argument. He says, listen, I'm an American. I don't see why I should sublet to any other jurisdiction in the world a decision on my laws. I am a sovereignist. So that's why they are so opposed to all these dispute resolution chapters, which include 11, 19, and 20. A sunset clause is bizarre. So we do a 5-year deal, then it's over. How do you decide to invest in that environment? Government procurement, another bizarre proposal. They say, we will give you access for the same amount of the size of your economy. But beyond that, it's Buy America. And supply management, which is difficult to take them seriously on that when you think of all the support that they offer their own agricultural community through the Farm Bill. Let me run through this rapidly about the trade wars. One thing to remember about the Obama administration, they have said very clearly we're going to use every tool available to us to protect ourselves from trade. One thing about Mr. Trump that's interesting, by the way, on a day-to-day basis, when you listen to the news, all of it's very chaotic. I mean, you get a sense of confusion and chaos. But on the key issues on which he has run, which include the wall, and it includes immigration, it includes trade, it includes taxes, he has not diverged. He hasn't changed his mind. And he continues to pursue his agenda. So we should be careful not to think that it's all improvised, when in fact he has been very focused on that key list of elements that are out there. NAFTA and CETA is where I think, as I look into the future, and this administration won't be there all the time, if I had a view of the world, I'd say, if we're able to secure NAFTA, why would we not do a deal of the 3 countries of NAFTA with Europe? Why would we not seek to and expand what trade is? You know, the trade agenda is interesting because it's now going into areas that the Trudeau government has pointed to as a progressive agenda. More difficult in certain countries, but there is something there. Essentially what the Trudeau government is saying is trade has to be more than just about numbers. We have to ensure that the benefits of trade are also the benefits that we want for the environment, for social justice, for the distribution of income for. And that's not something that people are offended by. How we do it is another issue. But on trade, if we were to pursue a progressive agenda and we wanted to go further, that's where I think we should be doing. And in the case of Canada, we're a country of 36 million people only. We have a high standard of living. Folks, we cannot maintain the standard of living. We can't maintain what Carleton University has built unless we trade. It's that simple. There's no other way. How we do it is key. And the problem is we're focused and concentrated in the United States. We need to diversify. Now, when we diversify, we have to recognize that trade is geography. Trade is geography. We traded with the United States before NAFTA. If NAFTA disappears, we'll trade with them after. But if we want to diversify and go elsewhere, we have to make a conscious decision to do that and the effort to get there. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. The other good news, by the way, let me put it there. On CETA, we often ask, why did Europe accept to negotiate with Canada? We're a small part of the world economy. Because we asked them. There's a rule. There's no one in the morning who gets up and says, hey, why don't we make a deal with Canada today? And it's not a knock against the country. What it says is that everything that we get you have to hustle for. You have to put in you have to be clear on you can accomplish it if you know what you want. Here is sort of where we are. I mean, we're implementing CETA now with Europe, TPP. India is one of the targets we have. NAFTA, we're in. South Korea, we have a deal. ASEAN, we're at the beginning of discussions. And China, something will happen on the China front. I mean, there was the trip in December that ended up in some confusion on whether or not we were going to do something with China. In the case of China, Canadians have a lot of misgivings. In the end, it's inevitable. China, we have to decide what we want to do and manage the relationship with China. And whether it's trade or an investment decision, but with that, we just cannot not pretend that that's there. A changing political order, a big part of our lives is going to be the rise of China and the geopolitical consequences of that as we look ahead. This chart just gives you a sense of where these economies are going. In red is China, and you can see the lines going this way and stronger. This is 2022 and 1980. And the United States is fairly stable, and Europe, but China and India are taking more and more place on that chart. Here is a comment on populism, which I think is extremely important for us to acknowledge in this age. This is one of the big trends. Brexit, Marine Le Pen in France, the German election campaign, Austria. And it's not just Trump. You know, it's Canada. We had a mayor called Rob Ford in the United States that got as much coverage as Donald Trump when he was in office. Believe me, when I was traveling, I'm not kidding you, that's what people wanted to talk about. And it was and that's part of populism. But what is driving this? Why? Why is this happening? And a big part of the story is immigration and the movement of immigration, economic decline, an increase in inequality in certain specific countries, and minorities. There's this perceived sense that progress made by certain groups is made at the expense of other groups, as though it's a zero-sum game. And that's what populists exploit. Populists in their modus operandi exploit resentment, fear, and they try to create a sense of intimacy in what they're doing. And it's very effective. Populism is the dope of politics. It's the drug of politics. It's very easy to do, but if you run for office, I remember someone saying to that me very early, you have a choice to playing to the lowest common denominator or the highest one. The lowest will get you where you want to go faster and probably burn you on the way when you get there. And the highest common denominator is the one that we hope that everyone would thrive or try to achieve. But negative emotions are much more powerful than the other one, and you can affect and move public opinion more rapidly. Polarization on the left and populism on the left is about us versus them narrative, focused on economic divide between capitalists, working class, and populists to the left mostly take aim at trade. And on the right, it's about immigration. It's about clan consciousness, exploiting cleavages of race, religion, and nationality. And the Brexit campaign, you may have seen the reports on that in the aftermath and the post. The Leave side did focus groups and discovered in the focus groups that the biggest driver of votes to leave was the immigration issue. And then they hammered away at that issue during the campaign. And to a price for which they'll pay. A threat to democracies we're living in this world in which the new technologies are having a big impact on the way we practice democracy. A rise in nationalism, and I had here, that's the other component, and that's something I'm very sensitive to because of my Quebec experience. Nationalism, Xi Jinping's China dream, Abe wanting to return Japan to its past glory, Putin, obviously, Modi. Nationalism is also a drug of politics. But the problem with nationalism is that once you've climbed up the tree, you have to come down at one point. And if you feed that, and one of the issues that nationalist leaders run into is that they light fires they can't put out. So you feed this rhetoric of how we have been done wrong by, and how we're going to reestablish our prestige, and we're not going to allow them to step on us anymore or to shove this thing down our throat. And at one point, you're not going to control the people you're talking to, who are going to interpret a lot of things out of what you've just said. And so that is something combined with social inequalities that we see in Europe and Asia, some in North America, but also with militarization. If there's one thing I think the media is missing in the world today, is the combination of militarism and the spending. We are in a big, big military spend right now. In China, the United States, Russia, Japan, India, the Koreas. Combine that with nationalism, and they build all these toys. At one point, someone plays with them. And as we all know, wars do not happen by design. They happen by accident. They happen by overreach, miscalculation. And this is one of the things that I think we should worry about. Now, this is my favorite slide, and it explains a lot of what I think is happening with Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump and the world, he went on his first foreign trip to the Middle East and then to NATO a year ago. And when he returned, Gary Cohn, who's viewed in the White House as being centrist, and Mr. McMaster, his national security advisor, they co-wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal. And this is what they say. The president embarked on his first foreign trip with a clear-eyed outlook that the world is not a global community, but an arena. And the word arena has a sense here. What happens in arenas has to do with confrontation. It's an arena where nations, non-governmental actors, and businesses engage and compete for advantage. We bring to this forum unmatched military, political, economic, cultural, and moral strength. Rather than deny this elemental nature of international affairs, we embrace it. We're ready to fight in that arena. It's called power. And if you're the number one power in the world, you believe in the arena because you're the strongest. Almost a week later, Chrystia Freeland delivered a speech on behalf of our government on the new foreign policy. And this is what she said. This is just a week later. The fact that our friend and ally has called to question the very worth of its mantle of global leadership puts into sharper focus the need for the rest of us to set our own clear and sovereign course. For Canada, that course must be the renewal, indeed the strengthening of the post-war multilateral order. We will robustly support the rules-based international order and all its institutions and seek ways to strengthen and improve them. We will seek leadership in all these in NATO, G7, G20. If you're the strongest player, you believe in the arena. If you're all the others, including Canada, you believe in rules because you want to be protected from the brutal, sheer force and arbitrary force of whoever has the most power. The United States have always had that inclination. This is only just Mr. Trump bringing it to a new and higher level than I have ever seen before. And I think if to understand this government and where we're going is to understand that and to see why the other countries will continue to talk about a rules-based order. This is a comment on politics today, and it was made in 1972 by a great Canadian. And if there's one thing I think has evolved since I've left politics, is that politics has become entertainment more than ever before. And don't get me wrong, there's always been theater in politics. Not me, but others. I've observed it. And Marshall McLuhan in 1972 says this: politics will eventually be replaced by imagery. The politician will be only too happy to abdicate in favor of his image, because the image will be much more powerful than he could ever be. I mean, isn't that a story? In 1972, Marshall McLuhan saw that coming. Let me talk a bit about Canada and conclude on this, and just remind of who we are. 36 million people. One of the most decentralized federations in the world, by the way. I've been on both sides. The country's operated by the provinces, folks. They do the heavy lifting. I hope you don't mind. They do education, healthcare, the roads. The federal government's like a holding. They transfer money. And so we are one of the only other federation I know more decentralized than Canada is Belgium. And no one understands how Belgium works. We have a good, healthy economy, generally. We're rich in natural resources, but Canada's a knowledge-based economy. Its natural resources only 16% of our economy, though it's a bigger chunk of our exports. You have to put it's important to understand where resources fit in but we are basically a knowledge-based economy. We have a country of diversity. One of the things we do the best. 20% of our population is not born in Canada. In Toronto, 48% of the population, fourth biggest city in North America, not born in Toronto. I am a visible minority in Toronto. And I feel very comfortable. We do that better, and I choose my better than most countries. And we are self-conscious about immigration, integration, and we should be, because human nature is very powerful. By the way, what makes immigration work in a country? I think, figured it out. It's two things. You need a willing person who immigrates, who is motivated to integrate when they immigrate. And you need a motivated country to integrate those who come here. If you get both ingredients, motivation on the side of the one who comes, motivation on the country who hosts them to integrate them, then your chances of success increase. Where there are problems of immigration, you will often find countries whose motivation to integrate is not sufficient. But Canada is pretty good on that front. We're a trading nation, a member of the G7. We're lucky, very lucky, in a country of immigration. About the future, a few things. We need to increase and diversify trade, that's obvious. Take advantage of our energy resources. I believe in that. Get to new markets. It's a controversial issue, but I think we need to do that. I'll just mention protecting our sovereign territory. I'm covering a lot of ground here. Just as an aside, with global warming, the Arctic is becoming more and more of a territory that a lot of countries are looking at. I think we gravely and naively underestimate how important it is for us to occupy that territory. We have to implement a national plan for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which we're in good part doing. About the future, here are things that I think we need to do. We, by the way, have one of the best education systems in the world. If you read the newspapers, you wouldn't believe that. Especially in Quebec. Every day they announce the system's falling apart. It's terrible. Fact of the matter is, we do K-12 better than probably most vast majority of countries in the world. But we're very, very critical of and we should be, because that keeps us alert and keeps governments on their toes and improving it. Compare it to the American system, which is frankly mediocre and will create extremely important problems for them. We need to learn to reskill people. There's a mismatch between skills. And the other thing we need to do, which I believe in a lot, is more support for women and families. And we have good reason to believe that. It's a big part of today's federal budget, by the way. I hope I will not cast any umbrage on Mr. Morneau today and distract attention from his budget. I don't think that'll happen. But this apparently is a big issue for them. In Canada, we have an aging population. If we are going to succeed, we need to create an environment in which women have the choice of entering the labor market. It's not a matter of compelling anyone to do it, but that's what we need to do. And I'll show you a chart in a few minutes from now that speaks to that. I also believe we need to reorganize our society around an aging population. It does not make sense that people retire at 60 or even at 65. We are going to live longer better lives and healthier lives. And by the way, that's very good news. When I see a title in a newspaper that talks of the problem of an aging population, give me a break. I am going to live very long and make my kids very miserable. And we live healthy. A woman, and what's the challenge for us is to understand that a woman who is 60 years old today is not at all like her mother was at 60 years old. She is a very different person. She is better educated, economically more autonomous. She is in better health than her mother was at 60 years old. And that's very good news. But we still live in a society where we're organized around the idea that people retire at 60 or 62. When we know that if they stay active, they'll be healthier, they'll be happier, and that they need to continue to work and contribute to be able to maintain and sustain their lifestyle. And so that's one of the big challenges that I'd like to see. This is on women's participation rate. One thing we're very proud of in Quebec is that we've been able to affect that. There's one thing we did there, and when I arrived in Quebec politics in 1998, I was very skeptical of this universal daycare scheme because it costs a lot of money. It costs over $2 billion. Universal daycare accessible to every family at $5 a day, 10 hours, 2 meals. But you know what the effect of that was? When we combined it to my government implemented family allowances that were tax-free, which were also weighed in favor of low-income families, and we did parental leave that I understand was imitated today by the federal government, giving parental leave to men, not just to women, and making a flexible formula. The birth rate in Quebec went up, poverty went down, and the participation rate of women went up dramatically. Today, Quebec in 2017 has the third highest participation rate of women in the labor market in the world. This is where we were in 1997. This is over a very short period of time. So can we affect public policy? The answer is yes. Do we need more women in labor? Yes, we do. Do we need older people in the labor market? Yes. But we need to do that. But to do that, you need very focused public policy to get there. And the good news is, if we decide to do it, it can be done. We need to also focus on labor mobility. I happen to believe that the country that will get the labor mobility and people mobility side right will be the country that will have an edge. The United States are going in the wrong direction. The irony of Mr. Trump is that if he were to throw out all the illegals from Mexico tomorrow, the country would be paralyzed. The construction industry, restaurant industry, the agricultural sector. Canada needs researchers, we need professionals, we need tradespeople, we need manual labor. The challenge is to get it right. And if we are the first to get that right, we will have a big advantage in terms of quality of life. One thing we did with France that I was very proud of in Quebec, we did a labor mobility agreement, recognizing qualifications. You're a doctor in France, you're a doctor in Quebec, a lawyer in Quebec, a lawyer in France. You don't know how happy Quebecers are that we have all these French lawyers that can come in now. Pure happiness. But it covers 81 trades, but it's a big challenge. You know why? Because of the fact that these corporatist groups, whether it's nurses or others, will not change their habits very easily. But to make it as seamless as possible is what will allow us to grow. And I think Canada should lead the charge in fighting to maintain a rules-based international order. If we're looking for a mission as a mid-sized country, if there's something we should be the ones leading that charge. Finally, here's a philosopher who did not write a lot. In fact, it's the only thing he ever wrote. Mike Tyson, who used to be the world champion. So it goes, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, which happened to me about 5 times a day. And I thought it was very poetic, though, because it's very much life. Thank you very much. You've been very patient.
"50 slides. Very impressive.
Too much.
Thank you, Jean Charest, for your timely, thought-provoking talk. We now have about 20 minutes for questions and discussion. And as a courtesy to our guest and to others, could I ask you, first of all, to if you can make your way to one of the microphones, there's one there and one there. Speak as clearly as possible into one of the mics so that we can all hear you. Briefly identify yourself, and please confine your question or comment to a minute. After Monsieur Charest has responded to you, please leave the mic to allow others the same opportunity to participate. So we'll begin with this gentleman here.
I was delighted to hear you speak about exporting our oil and pipelines. You didn't explicitly say it, but I think you're endorsing the idea that Canada and Alberta should be allowed to get oil pipelines and gas pipelines to export. And related to that, what about fracking in Quebec? Yes or no?
We had a very, well, first of all, let me address the broader issue of oil and gas. Make one point about, I'm also a very big believer in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But let me give you an example where I think we miss the boat in the debate sometimes, because we're not going to be able to eliminate all carbon rapidly. It'll happen gradually, and it'll probably happen faster than what we think. And on the technology side, by the way, the day that we are able to store energy for batteries will be a tipping point for carbon in the world, but we're not there yet. If we wanted to have the biggest bang for the buck, if you really, really, really care about reducing greenhouse gas emissions and you're concerned and even maybe panicked about how fastly the world is warming, and it is, the single most important thing we could do would be to replace coal thermal production of energy in China with natural gas. That would be the most rapid thing that we could do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm concerned sometimes that in the broader debate, we miss that. Because we would, in a utopian world, we'd like to get rid of all carbon. But that's not going to happen. And Canada could contribute to that. On the other issues, like transporting and pipelines, I think pipelines are safer. And my mother was born in Bury, Quebec, about 20 kilometers from Lac-Mégantic. Lac-Mégantic is in the eastern townships where I'm from, where Chad is from, who's in this room, who I know today, who's from North Atlee. It just makes, and oil, it's not that I want to encourage the production or use of more oil, but we are going to continue. In the meantime, we're buying the oil from who? From Venezuela or from other countries? But it's a difficult debate, and we have to get it right. But I believe we need political will to say this is what we should be doing. The other part of your question was on
Quebec.
Very interesting. Quebec has no experience in oil and gas. And I learned a very real political lesson. When fracking started, we thought, oh, this is good. Let's go out and try to see what it gives. And then, but Quebec has no culture of oil and gas. None at all. We are a hydro culture. We're the best in the world in hydro, but we have no intuitive knowledge of what the oil and gas industry was. So when the industry went out and we let them go out and defend it, the whole thing blew up in our face. And politically, we lost control of the debate. And we ended up saying, no, we're not going to do it because we could not finally establish an environment in which people understood what it was or it could be done. So we learned a lot of very hard lessons on it. And now the law says you can't. My government did that, and I think for a while it's going to be that way. Who knows? They may revisit it, but if they do, they'll have the very heavy onus of demonstrating that it can be done at conditions that are acceptable for the water tables and for other. Sir, we'll alternate? Yes.
So my question sort of brings Quebec into the sort of NAFTA negotiations, and the United States is very adamant in their position on supply management. In your view, what should the Canadian government or the federal government be doing to respond to this position? And just because there are a lot of political consequences and ramifications if we sort of sign on with a repeal of supply management.
Well, supply management's an interesting political issue because it's a choice. It's a choice to develop a system that is based on predictability, order, and previsibility. Predictable. That's the core values around supply management. So you say, listen, we're going to evaluate what the size of the market is and adjust that to production. And yes, we'll pay more, but that way we'll be able to maintain our dairy industry, our poultry industry, and eggs. It comes with a cost. And Canadians generally have accepted to pay that. When I've been meeting people who've said to me, Jean, and there's a lot out there, believe me, especially in the business community, say, let's get rid of supply management. The question we ask them is, fine, it would cost between $20 and $30 billion to buy back the quotas. Who's going to pay? If you have an answer to that question, then we can have a discussion. The other answer I'm going to give you is a little disappointing because it's very, very political. There's going to be election campaigns in Ontario and Quebec within the year. None of those governments or any of the political parties are going to go out there and say, I am going to scrap supply management. I'm not sure how determined the Americans are on wanting to get rid of supply management. This would mean they'd have to put on the table the farm bill that heavily subsidizes their farming industry. And so I'm not convinced they'll take. Now, the last part of the answer is this. What have we done in other trade deals? In the case of CETA, we opened up the supply management system with access to a quota to the tune of about 3.75%. How? 3.5. Meredith was there at the time. And with TPP, 3.25%. And with the United States, I think that would probably end up being the same kind of approach. We'd say, well, we'll open up part of the quota so that you can come in, and then we'll deal with it from that point of view. Yes, Fareed.
Thanks very much for your talk. I'm glad that your slides mentioned the issue of populism. And I want to talk about an issue that's very personal to me, I think to a lot of Canadians. When you were Premier, you launched the Bouchard Commission. One of the things that came out of that, of course, was a lot of people who came forth who expressed very unpleasant and distasteful views about diversity in our society. We then had the PQ come out with their Charter of Values, which generated even more distastefulness in the politics of Quebec. We had Stephen Harper, who decided to pick on a Muslim woman because of her religious practice. Now we have in Quebec all three parties supporting Bill 62, which targets a minority of Muslim women in Quebec. And federally, we have a party leader in Andrew Scheer, who just recently hired two people who were involved in the organization of anti-Muslim hate rallies in Toronto last year. When you were leader and when I was working with you and the other people in the party, the world was very different. We felt like we were moving forward. We now have this populism happening. It's distasteful. It's dangerous. I'm an immigrant. I am the son of refugee parents. My late wife, her father was a Holocaust survivor. So this is an issue that's very personal to me. And I would like to get your take on it. And if Andrew Scheer and the three party leaders from Quebec were sitting in this room, and if Justin Trudeau were sitting in this room, what would you be telling them to deal with this issue?
Well, that's a very big question. Let me start with Bouchard-Taylor because I was in the middle of that in 2007, and it was a very painful experience. And it started with the third party in the National Assembly, Mario Dumont, who decided to start hammering away at this issue. And it started with the story of reasonable accommodation. You remember, accommodement raisonnable? It was the Supreme Court ruling that said that a student could wear a kirpan in school, and it was allowed to do that, to reasonably accommodate that concept. And I remember how the story started in Quebec. There was a story in the media, I think it was TVA, about a gym that was asked to fog their windows because there was Hasidic Jews in Mont and Outremont who could see through them. And then there was another story, and this was seized upon by the third party on identity politics, and they hammered away at it and hammered away at it. And the media, by the way, the media loved it. There was a very interesting study about how the media treats the story of Muslims, and I'll give you the examples compelling. And I think they did a random survey of the number of pictures taken of Muslim women when there was a story that was related to Islam in Quebec. And I think it was 8, I don't know how many times, disproportionately, it was women who were wearing la burqa. When in fact, the number of women who wear la burqa in Quebec are probably 100 out of a population of 8 million. But the image that was projected wasn't the reflection of what it was, and the image was, whether consciously or unconsciously, was given to increase the, and so the media's behavior, frankly, was something that they should be accountable for. Now, what followed was interesting because Madame Marois was the third party after the election of 2007 that I almost lost because I ran a very bad campaign, and I end up with a minority government. Madame Marois is in third position. It was Boisclair, but she succeeds him. And she said something very significant that leads to the charter and where we are today. She said, never again will we allow another party to steal from us the identity issue. That was the... On ne permettra pas, l'enjeu de l'identité, c'est notre enjeu. And so Dumont was defeated in 2008. We won a majority government, we won. Bouchard-Taylor did their report. In their report, by the way, Bouchard-Taylor very courageously ran through the false stories of the media. One of them, I was again in Lac-Mégantic on an election day, I had to respond to a story about a group of Muslims who chartered a bus to go to a cabane à sucre. This was a story, and demanded to have a praying room at la cabane à sucre. Cabane à sucre have des oreilles de Christ, and they serve pork, and and the picture of them praying in the cabane à sucre. It was a false story. It never happened. But I had to, this is the atmosphere. Why did we do Bouchard-Taylor? And by the way, both of them extraordinary people. I don't agree with a lot that Mr. Bouchard thinks on sovereignty, because he's the brother of Lucien. Very great man, by the way. But Charles Taylor is one of the world's greatest philosophers. And so they did some exceptional work, and we implemented some of their recommendations. Some of them we did not. And but we were trying to get a handle on the debate. The frustrating part for me was the absence of a discussion and the inability to have a reasoned discussion. And when you're an elected person, that's one of the most frustrating things that can happen. But it does happen. The public opinion is so inflamed, you just have to find a way to calm the waters, get people down to a level where we can talk about real things. And that's what Bouchard-Taylor was about. Now, Madame Marois, when she forms the government, because of that, they decide to do the charter. The charter was the first time ever in the history of the separatists in Quebec that they deliberately designed a policy to separate and to have people oppose each other in society. That had never been done before, and it scared a lot of people. Now, the good news, in that Quebec election campaign, Quebecers figured it out. And it was a very interesting, for me watching it, it's as though Quebecers, because these are very tempting issues, by the way. We're talking about human nature. We should not underestimate. We do fear what is different. We're suspicious of it's human nature. That's why we need to be conscious of that and make an effort to avoid that sentiment overriding everything else when we know reality is different. So Quebecers, fed with this, they walked to the side, the end of the precipice, and they looked in, and I thought it was fascinating because they looked in and they said, you know what? I don't think so. I don't like this charter thing. There's something wrong with it. But it's a very powerful pull. Mr. Harper, and I have a lot of respect for Mr. Harper, but I do think, yes, they went too far in the campaign. And again, Canadians, it's to the Canadians' credit that they looked at what Mr. Harper and the Conservatives were saying, and they too looked on the other side and said, no. I'm not sure why, but I'm not going there. That's not where I want to go. So it's the responsibility of those who are in office to play to that higher common denominator. But we should be conscious of the fact that if we live in a society that's pluralistic, that we need to constantly be vigilant about that. We need to integrate people. We need to learn to listen. We need to accept differences. And we're admired throughout the world because we do it better than others. But we should never underestimate the fact that this will require constant effort on our part. Yes?
First of all, thank you very much for the entertaining and illuminating presentation. I'd like to delve a little bit further into two things. One, your allusion to your family in Hong Kong, and your comment about human nature. But I'd like to use a different example. A couple of years ago, I was in Oxford, and a medievalist, in response to the question, of how a medieval person would find our society different, one point she made was a sense of community. And she used a British example, which was you're born in a town or a small city, you go to university in another place, the job magnet is London. You can't afford to live in London. You commute in some suburb. And you're in London for 5 days of the week, and 2 days on the weekend you're in your home. What community are you part of?
Yeah.
And it seems that we're in a stage, I mean, part of it is change in technology, which has driven different types of communications, different types of business, where industry has exploited it very well. Society and government, not so much. And given your commitment to public policy for the betterment of society, I was wondering how you saw that government might actually respond. I don't know whether it's electoral reform, media, not the word control, but a media refinement. I'd leave it open to you because you're much more experienced.
Well, you're very kind to say that. Let me give you two examples of what I think you're referring to that I experienced. One was the debate in 2003 in Quebec when the government of Quebec, of Lucien Bouchard, decided to amalgamate all the cities on the island of Montreal. And I knew Lucien. Lucien, by the way, he was a very brilliant man and very capable. But Lucien probably said, là, c'est assez, là. Ça n'a pas de sens. Là. On va avoir une seule ville à Montréal. Puis, because logically, one administration, it's one island, and we should, put it on. What I think he was missing in others, and I don't think he did, is that, in smaller communities, you know the person who's representing you. You can talk to them. You call them. If there's something in front of your house, you say, come on. The smaller communities afford that. And I thought that was one of the parts that was missing. And that I believe in. Smaller communities allow that. And that's why some conservatives say smaller government is better, because it gets better. Well, we'll not. The other thing on community that on that theme that I read recently that was very interesting was the lead up to the German election. There was an article in the Financial Times that had a very interesting story that I didn't know about Germany. Why does Germany work in certain ways? Why is it able to has a certain level of cohesiveness? I didn't know this, but in German culture, people are often part of clubs, local clubs in their community. It can be a sport club. It could be a curling club. It could be a collecting stamps club. But it's very much part of the makeup of that country that people are part of clubs, and that offers people a sense of community and a sense of cohesiveness. Now, has Canada lost that? Are we a country that has not paid attention to that? I'm not sure. I know a difference between us and the United States. We are much more urbanized than the Americans are. We're less rural than they are. And I think we do have a sense. I generally, in my political career, what I've always loved about Canadians is that they are very welcoming. Yes, they are more subdued than Americans. That's why we find Mr. Trump so difficult, because the boastfulness, Canadians are not that way. I say to friends from abroad, you want to recognize a Canadian tourist in your country, it's the person who thanks the ATM machine. That's a Canadian. So I don't think we've lost that, but the other part of it is social media. We live in these bubbles. I mean, and we do talk to echo chambers. We read media that only reinforces what we say, and we should educate ourselves to the fact that we need to open up more. So I don't think we've lost that sense of community, but we should be concerned about that. Yes?
Mr. Charest, great presentation. Very quickly, you painted a very bracing, I think, view of what's going on in the world, and certainly in terms of trade and the economy. It seems like there's a disconnect between public policy and politics. We don't get a lot of politicians really tackling some of the things you've talked about here. Mm-hmm. I mean, we are within weeks of a great possibility of the plug being pulled on NAFTA. And yet I don't see very much kind of how do we really handle that? I mean, in the short term, for several years, that would be a massive amount of anxiety, at least in the economy. And I'm wondering why that disconnect is there a disconnect, first of all, between public policy and politics? And you mentioned media. I'm wondering, what is your view of how the media handles these kinds of changes and these kinds of, well, echo chambers that you're talking about? I mean, I just wonder, are you a pessimist about this? Are you an optimist about this? I mean, where do we stand now?
Well, I don't think the media is doing the job they should do, honestly. And that's very easy to say, by the way. Every time an ex-politician says that, they'll say, sure, of course. And the media, by the way, there was an expression I borrowed from a friend, that, if you're in politics, complaining about the media is like fish complaining about water in the ocean, right? And it's the world in which you live. So you have to be careful about that. But let's take a step back. Is the media really serving us well by giving us more in-depth views? And the media's, their environment's changing so rapidly. Financially, it's very difficult for them to sustain themselves. And it's a very, very different world. But let's turn that around. Let's not blame the media for a moment and ask ourselves, how are we raising our children? How are we behaving? Are we critical? Have we developed a critical mind? And I was raised in an environment where you were taught to be critical in the positive sense, avoir un esprit critique, a critical mind, when you read newspapers. I read a lot of newspapers, and I read Le Devoir, even though they're leftists and they're sovereignists. And I read Le Monde, and I read the Financial Times, and I read the Wall Street Journal. On weekends, I read about 16 newspapers. I love it, by the way. My wife thinks I'm nuts. But, and why? And I read different points of view. I read in different languages. Guess what? France has a different view of the world than Great Britain. And it's like another window. It's the same world. It's the same place. But they just see it differently. And if you understand that, and I think that's an attribute of Canada, actually, is that Canadians do have an innate understanding that the world is not made in our image. And it serves us well when we look at it that way. So I'm not optimistic about the media. I'm concerned that we're all reading, we choose to read the stuff we believe in and stay in that zone, and that's a mistake. We should be more open-minded. And hopefully, as time progresses. One encouraging word, I've been in the last campaign I was in 2012, the TVA and the Journal de Montréal and the media were horrible. I mean, the polls were bad. I never got a good poll in my life, by the way. I mean, I was better at election campaigns. But they all predicted we'd be wiped off the map. On election night, we finish at 0.5% difference. I think with people who read that media, they discount a number of things. I do think they do understand. Yes, and are we...
I'm afraid this will have to be our last question, but I'm sure that Monsieur Charest would be happy to speak to you at the reception that follows.
Yes, so. You've been very patient already, so... Thank you.
Mr. Charest,
yes.
Thank you for your talk. My question, I'm a master's student at Carleton in European Russian and Eurasian Studies. I'm working as a researcher in a consultancy firm. My question is about your thoughts on Canada and Turkey relations in the context of trade, considering the fact that it's a 80 million country and it has a high GDP and well, the other benefits like economic power in the region.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts about the relationship and how to foster that?
Well, the story of Turkey, and I don't know that much about it. I've only been to Istanbul a few times. It was a very, very beautiful city in the old Constantinople, and it's at the center of the universe, as you know, in a lot of ways, the history. And with 80 million people, it's a very strong market. It's one of those markets that have a growing middle class. Now, the longer debate with Turkey has been its eventual entry into the European Union, which doesn't seem to want to happen in the short term, but they do have an agreement on border agreement, excise border, I forget the expression, which has served them very well. The political side, I don't pretend to completely capture. I mean, Erdogan, Mr. Erdogan, there is a fear that they will move from the legacy of Atatürk and rather than being a secular society, move to become or accepting or tolerant of what is a growing Islamism within government. And that is something that I think a lot of us are concerned about. Overall, though, I think, one of the mistakes we make is that we need to engage those countries. rather than just judge on what's happening in the short term. I believe in that. I think we need to, whether it's a country like Russia, for example, or others, that in the end, it's easy to just cut off relations, but we need to engage with those countries. So that's, you know, the best answer and the best informed and honest answer I could give you. I'll just finish by telling, I just came from a tour in the Middle East, where I was in Kuwait and the Emirates, and I went to Qatar. And if you think of the Middle East for a lot of Canadians, you'll think conflict, terrorism, or a binary choice between Israel and... But the world isn't made that way. The challenge of Canada, though, in those parts of the world is two. We're not sufficiently present, A, and two, we are not constant. And in our foreign policy, we need to become more constant in our presence in that. If we do that, and we're more disciplined in how we do that, then we'll have a much better reach and a better understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monsieur Charest. I'd like to now invite Dr. Alistair Summerlee, our Vice Chancellor and President, to the stage to thank our guest on behalf of Carleton.
Thank you very much. I thought that you should reflect a little bit on some of the key messages that came today, one of which I have great resonance with because I recently attended a talk where one of the eminent physicians in Ottawa said, of the people that are in this room, the majority of you are going to live to 120, and probably a number of you will live to 150. So when you went on your little diatribe about we shouldn't retire at 60, 65, I think you're right on the mark, as indeed, from my perspective, and I think you got from the audience, almost everything you said had great resonance with us. With one piece that I would seriously like to add, and that is that, in my view, universities should be the moral and social conscience of society. We should be the place where there's informed debate in society. And we have given up that stage in most cases to the media, which is how we get to the point that you were just so articulately saying around the role that the media is playing in our lives at the moment. And if only we could restore the kind of interaction and discussion in universities in the way that you have so eloquently delivered tonight, that we would be in so much better position. Because undoubtedly, we have great strength in our universities, and it is just a pleasure to be in the company of somebody who can articulate where Canada needs to go and needs to be thinking about so perfectly. So on behalf of Carleton, may I give you a small gift to add to probably the millions that you have in your trophies, to say thank you so much for being here, and not just educating us, but absolutely entertaining us in the very best way possible, and giving us a lot to think about. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Alice. Very kind. Thank you.